What up, what up? Welcome back to the channel, and thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you like the video. If you don't like the video, leave a comment and let me know why. Between working full-time and going to school full-time, subscribing really shows me that the time spent here is enjoyable to someone out there. The game this week is kinda crazy, and as always, we're playing with some cool people, so a big thanks to Will, Bear, and Vince for letting me record this game of Commander. If you'd like to hop in a game of Commander yourself or just chat it up, feel free to hop in our SpellTableSplits Discord server. It'll be linked below. Starting us off, we have Will playing his Enchantress Atraxa brew with a Super Friends sub-theme. His starting 7 has a Plains, a Forest, a Marsh Flats, a Breeding Pool, a Spark Double, a Phyrexian Arena, and a Copy Artifact. Next, we have myself. I'll be playing my Be'lakor the Dark Master deck with Garuda as my companion. It's full of demons and clone effects, trying to use Be'lakor's ability to Warstorm Surge the table with Enter the Battlefield damage. My starting 7 has a Polluted Delta, a Swamp, a Jeweled Lotus, a Chrome Mox, a Swiftfoot Boots, a Teferi's Time Twist, and a Nightmare Shepherd. Bear is going to be playing his Mayael the Anima deck, trying to cheat in expensive creatures with powerful abilities. He's starting with a Corrosive Verge, a Terramorphic Expanse, a Rockfall Veil, a Plains, a Flawless Maneuver, a Nature's Lore, and a Kodama of the East Tree. Lastly, Vince is playing his Intet Timber Dragons deck. It's heavy on the ramp so that he can cast big creatures way ahead of curve. His starting 7 has a Wooded Foothills, a Rejuvenating Springs, a Tropical Island, a 3 Visits, an Exploration, a Tireless Provisioner, and a See the Unwritten. Now, I'm gonna go and get up out of here, let you get to the gameplay. Peace. Will starts by playing a Marsh Flats and immediately cracking it for an Intet Triome. Then he'll kick the turn my way. I'm gonna play a Polluted Delta, do the same, and I'll be fetching up a Xander's Lounge before passing the turn over to Bear. Bear plays a Terramorphic Expanse, trash canning it to fetch a forest into play, tapped and passing to Vince. Vince plays a Tropical Island, using it to pay for an Exploration. Thanks to Exploration, he'll play Wooded Foothills as his second land drop, using it to fetch up a Ketria Triome and passing to Will. Will plays a Breeding Pool tap and passes it to me. I'll play a Swamp and then cast an early game Swiftfoot Boots, hoping to get some protection from my commander later on. After that, I'll pass it to Bear. Bear starts by playing a Plains, and then he'll tap out to cast Nature's Lore, tutoring up a Jetmir's Garden and passing the turn. Vince casts one of my favorite green cards, Lotus Cobra, which has a landfall trigger to float a mana of any color, and then he'll pass to Will. Will plays a Swamp. From there, he'll cast Phyrexian Arena to draw an extra card each turn at the cost of 1 life. Then he'll pass it to me. I'm gonna play an Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, making every land a swamp in addition to their other types. Then I'll use my mana to buy my companion Garuda Doom of Depths. I'll put it into my hand and give the turn to Bear after that. Bear plays a Corrosive Verge tapped. Then he'll cast his commander Mayael the Anima, which allows him to pay 3 plus Naya mana and tap Mayael. He'll get to look at the top 5 cards of his library. He can put a creature card with power 5 or greater from among them onto the battlefield, and put the rest on the bottom of his library in any order. After that, he'll pass the turn to Vince. Vince plays a Rejuvenating Springs, triggering Lotus Cobra to make a floating green mana. Then he'll cast Crucible of Worlds, which is an artifact that allows him to play lands from his graveyard. Thanks to Exploration, he'll play Wooded Foothills from his graveyard as his second land drop, floating another green mana with Lotus Cobra. Using the 2 floating mana, he'll cast 3 Visits to tutor for Stomping Ground. Which he'll put into play tapped and pass the turn, letting the floating mana from Lotus Cobra float away. Will starts his turn with his Phyrexian Arena trigger. He'll pay a life and draw a card. He'll then play an island. He'll tap out to cast Academy Rector, which when this card is put into a graveyard from play, he can choose to exile it to search his library for an enchantment and put it onto the battlefield. After that, he'll pass the turn to me. I'll start my turn by casting Chrome Mox and exiling Teferi's Time Twist so that Chrome Mox can tap for a blue mana. Then I'll cast Jeweled Lotus, which I can tap and sacrifice for 3 mana of any color, and I have to use that mana to cast my commander. I'll do that and cast my commander, Be'lakor the Dark Master. My commander has 2 abilities, Prince of Chaos and Lord of Torment. Prince of Chaos reads, when Be'lakor the Dark Master enters the battlefield, I draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of demons I control. Lord of Torment reads, whenever another demon enters the battlefield under my control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. It's a War Storm Surge on a stick. I'll draw a card thanks to the Prince of Chaos's ability, then I'll equip my Swiftfoot Boots to my commander, play a swamp, and pass the turn, holding up a blocker for possible Mayael shenanigans. Bear plays a Rockfall Veil, then he'll pay 2 mana to sacrifice his Krosan Verge and fetch a Plateau and a Taiga. He shuffles his library and passes the turn events. Vince starts his turn by casting Tireless Provisioner, which has a landfall trigger to create a food or treasure token. Then he'll trash can his Wooded Foothills to fetch a Steam Vince, generating a treasure from Tireless Provisioner and floating a mana from Lotus Cobra. Because of Crucible of Worlds, he can play his Wooded Foothills from his graveyard, doing it again, but this time fetching up a Volcanic Island. After generating a significant amount of mana, he casts Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, which exiles 2 permanents on ETB. Now, in post-production, I realized that he got 1 more landfall trigger than he should have, but because he still has a second land drop to hit this turn, it doesn't change how the game would have played out. He targets Will's Academy Rector as his first target, and then he'll target my Swiftfoot Boots as his second target to exile. After that, he'll go ahead and pass the turn over to Will. Will is going to play a Plains, then he'll cast his commander, Atraxa Praetor's Voice. It has Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink. Plus, Atraxa lets Will proliferate at his end step. He'll pass the turn to me after that. I'll drop a Drowned Catacomb. Then I'll tap out to cast my companion, Garuda, Doom of Depths. Because it's my companion, my entire deck has to consist of only even mana costed cards. When Garuda enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, and I get to put 1 even converted mana cost creature onto the battlefield of the cards milled this way. With Garuda's trigger, I'll put Sakashima Student into play as a copy of Garuda. Then I'll get to deal 6 damage to Vince's Tireless Provisioner. Sakashima Student will die to the Legend Rule, but I'll get another Garuda trigger. With that trigger, I'll choose to put Rakdos, Lord of Riots, onto the battlefield and deal 6 damage to Bear's face, not targeting Vince this time, hoping that his Ulamog doesn't come my way. Now after getting my Demon Gang out, I go ahead and pass the turn to Bear. Bear is going to play a Bountiful Promenade and cast Soul Ring, signed by none other than the person behind the art of this card, Mr. Mark Tadine. Then he'll activate his commander's ability to look at the top 5 cards of his library and put a creature with power 5 or greater onto the battlefield. Sadly and unbelievably, Mayael's ability misses and he's forced to pass the turn events. Vince plays an island, doing the Lotus Cobra thing. Then he plays the Wooded Foothills from his graveyard for like the 5th time this turn, really getting value out of that fetch land and getting another floating mana from the Lotus Cobra. He'll fetch a Breeding Pool, shotgunning it in, floating another green. Then he'll use his obscene amount of mana to cast See the Unwritten. To reveal the top 8 cards of his library, he can put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield and the rest into his graveyard. But if he controls a creature with power 4 or greater, which thanks to Ulamog he does, he gets to put 2 creatures onto the battlefield instead. He reveals a Vandal Blast, Kodama's Reach, Cascade Bluffs, Windswept Heath, Cyclonic Rift, the Great Henge, Another Land, and Augur of Autumn. Since Augur of Autumn is the only creature revealed, that's going to be what he'll put into the battlefield. Now that could have been much, much worse. It's another very unlucky miss. After that, he'll cast Xenagos, God of Revels. It's one of the Theros gods, so it's not a creature as long as Vince's devotion to green and red is less than 7. It's indestructible, and at the beginning of his combat phase, he gives a creature haste and +X, where X is the creature's power. Vince moves to combat, giving his Ulamog +10/+10 and swinging it at will. He swings a 20/20 Ulamog, triggering his ability and forcing Will to exile the top 20 cards of his library. Will takes the damage and then he moves to his untap step, beginning his turn. Will is going to take a damage to draw an extra card from his Phyrexian Arena. Then he'll move to his main phase 1 and cast Citizen Champion. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under his control, Citizen Champion gets a +1/+1 counter, and he'll draw a card. After that, he casts Viridian Revel. It's an enchantment that lets him draw a card whenever an artifact is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield. A great piece of treasure hate. That'll trigger Citizen Champion, so he'll draw a card and put a counter on it. He moves to combat and sends Atraxa at Vince as recompense, gaining 4 life from lifelink and passing the turn over to me after proliferating his counter. I'm gonna play Shivan Reef and immediately move to combat, sending my commander at Vince for 6 damage in the air. In my main phase, I'll cast Nightmare Shepherd for 2 mana, thanks to Rakdos, Lord of Riots, making all of my creatures cost 6 generic less this turn. This creature says, whenever another non-token creature I control dies, I can exile it. If I do, I create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a 1/1 and it's a nightmare in addition to its other types. After that, I'll cast Dread Return, returning Sakashima Student from my graveyard to the battlefield as a copy of, you guessed it, Garuda. I'll target Vince with the 6 damage from my commander's ability, and Sakashima Student will die to the legend rule, and I'll choose to exile it and make a token copy of it with Nightmare Shepherd's ability. It'll be coming in as a 1/1 Sakashima Student, but it'll be copying Garuda, so it'll enter as a 6/6. We all mill 4 cards, and I get to put an even cost creature into play. I choose Rakdos the Showstopper. When the Showstopper enters the battlefield, we have to flip a coin for each non-demon creature and destroy each creature whose coin flip comes up tails. Bear responds to that ETB trigger with Tamio's Safekeeping, protecting his commander, and we start flipping coins. Lotus Cobra comes up tails and gets destroyed. Xenagos and Ulamog are indestructible, and Augur of Autumn wins the flip. Atraxa wins the flip, and Citizen Champion loses the flip, so it gets destroyed. Now the token of Sakashima Student is going to come into play as a copy of Garuda, and we'll do it again. The 6 damage from the Showstopper entering the battlefield is going to go to Bear. And I'll hit a Dax Duplicate off of Garuda's trigger, which is going to start the process all over again. Dax Duplicate is going to enter as a copy of Garuda, so we'll all mill 4. Vince mills a Consecrated Sphinx, which I choose to put into the battlefield for my Garuda trigger. The Dax Duplicate Garuda is going to die to the legend rule. I'll choose to exile it and put a token copy of it into play. That's going to be another 6 damage to Bear. With this Garuda trigger, I'll choose the clone that I milled to come in as a copy of Garuda, so we'll start this up again, dealing another 6 damage, this time to Willy. I'll bring to the battlefield Scourge of the Throne, milled by Vince. The clone is going to die to the legend rule, and I'll exile it to get a token copy coming back as a clone of Garuda again, dealing 6 damage, this time to Vince. I'll choose to return the Burning Rune Demon that I milled to the battlefield. It'll come into play with 6 damage, which I choose to deal to Bear, and when it enters the battlefield, I can search my library for 2 cards, not named Burning Rule Demon, and an opponent chooses one to go into my hand and the other to go into my graveyard. I tutor up Wall of Stolen Identity and Phyrexian Metamorph. Vince chooses to put the Metamorph into my graveyard and the Wall into my hand. Thanks to Lord of Riots, I can cast the Wall for 1 mana, bringing it in as a copy of Garuda. I'll deal another 6 damage to Will and put the Gigantoplasm that I milled onto the battlefield as a copy of, say it with me, Garuda. But before that, I'll choose to exile the Wall version of Garuda that I had to sacrifice to the Legend Rule and bring it back as a token copy of Garuda to do the Garuda thing again. Now, I don't get an even CMC hit this trigger, so I'll start the Gigantoplasm Garuda trigger now. That's going to be another 6 damage to Vince. And I hit an Evil Twin, which is another clone, but I still have my second Gigantoplasm trigger on the stack after I exile it and bring it back. With the second trigger, I'm going to hit Undercover Operative, which is another clone. That'll give me a total of 24 more damage to send out to the table, in factors of 6. That's going to be enough damage to finally finish out the game. Now, I know my last turn was a little long and convoluted, but I hope you all enjoyed the gameplay. If you did, feel free to smack that subscribe button, give me a like, maybe leave a comment down there telling me that maybe you hate clones and demons. Until next time, I'll see you all at the table.